Hello guys, my name is Colin and this is Colin Talks Crypto. Does anyone know what time it is? Anyone have the time? Oh, it's time for EOS Mega Update Volume 25. I don't always make EOS Mega updates, but when I do, it's because there's so much news and so much happening in the EOS ecosystem that I can't resist. I need to be excited and pumped up when I do one of these videos, and that is what I am today. And we are going to cover everything from EOS New York's new governance proposal, Dan Larimer's new EOS governance proposal, and these will be at the end of the video because I'm going to go into them into depth. We're going to cover progress activating EOSIO 1.8's new features. GenerEOS is creating an open source exchange voting portal, a graph of BP vote distribution by EOS Authority, new EOS graphs and charts by EOS Titan, a Colin Talks Crypto Rewards Proxy update, and EOS Cafe's Tipbot. And again, stay tuned till the end because I dive deep into these governance proposals and I have some charts that I drew up to help make it easy to understand EOS New York's governance proposal. Thank you very much for joining me. So good to be back with you guys. So as you know, EOSIO 1.8, the latest in making EOSIO faster than ever before, has been upgraded. However, the features have not yet been activated, and we've been waiting for weeks for this. And it looks like we've just started seeing the first steps to activating those features. EOSLaoMao talks about how there are about 10 of these features, and they have started the first proposal to activate the first. And we'll take a look at that right here. It's taking much longer than we would have liked, but I do want to give props to EOSLaoMao for taking the lead and creating this multi-sig to get things going. Next up, we have GenerEOS, block producer. They're doing some incredible things lately. I cannot give them enough props and enough shout outs. So not only are they helping me on the back end to code the Colin Talks Crypto Rewards Proxy payout system for block producers, but in the meantime, they've also been creating an open source exchange voting portal. That's right, guys. This whole concern about exchanges not giving the right to votes to the token holders is being solved with this creation. And this is a creation by EOS Rio, GenerEOS, EOS, and EOS Node 1. It's worth noting that I happen to be already voting for all four of these with my proxy. And so basically, this is an open source piece of software that is going to be given to the community and to exchanges specifically to allow their token holders and the customers that they have to vote with the tokens even while being on their exchange. And this is tremendously important because there are so many tokens on exchanges like Huobi and Bitfinex. And right now, Huobi and Bitfinex have literally sole custody and control of these. And one could argue that they are being sort of a proxy, but I really feel it's a bit of a stretch because a lot of the time, token holders either just don't care, don't have the information, or it's just too much work to take the tokens off into their own control. And so this is going to level the playing field and allow token holders on exchanges the right to vote. So huge governance props to all four of these block producers for their contributions. This is one of the many steps that are going to begin to level the playing field and balance the block producer rankings a bit more, I feel. And we're going to get into some more things coming up that will help this as well. So here's a visual of kind of what I would consider to be a problem on EOS. And you can see with the blue line, this is the current line of the block producer standings and the vote weight distribution. So you can see that currently we've had the biggest divergence in the number of votes that these top 21 BPs have and that the later BPs have. And the black line is the month before that, the green line is the month before that, and the orange line is the month before that. You can see that every month it's been getting progressively worse in that the distribution is more and more weighted to the top 21, and it's harder and harder for the outside BPs to even compete. And so if this graph is telling us anything, it's that this trend is going to continue, which is just another reason why we need to have a governance change, which is the point of this EOS Mega Update Volume 25. I want to take a little jump into EOS Titan's page they made here. So basically you can see all sorts of charts, statistics, graphs. You can see the actions per hour on EOS with which are the top dApps that are taking those actions. You can take a look at the contracts and what those contracts are, beautiful color coded. You can look at the number of transactions per second, the CPU cost, milliseconds per EOS. You can look at CPU utilization percentage, net cost per megabytes per EOS, and net utilization. And if you want, you can create a dashboard, throw these all on one dashboard, and you can check these out at a quick glance. So this is in addition to their already awesome proxy and block producer heat map page. They are just doing an awesome job over at EOS Titan, and I want to give them a shout out for that. Check out the EOS Titan dashboard in my description for the link below. And Colin Talks Crypto Rewards Proxy is growing. Thank you guys for your support. We're almost at 1 million votes. This just shows your support. And I really value that because it's signaling to block producers what you want. And clearly you want to vote for value adding BPs and you want to get a reward. And that is what you are showing by voting for this. We are building the back end right now. GenerEOS from Australia has been working day in and day out for the past week, making this back end functional. And we are at the last step. So it will be live very soon, and thank you for your patience. If you want the latest updates on this and to know the moment it goes live, follow me on Twitter, Colin T Crypto, and join my Telegram group, t.me/Colin Rewards. And the EOS account name is also Colin Rewards. And that's where you should delegate your votes if you want to get a reward. And speaking of my rewards Telegram group, Saeed of EOS Cafe has so kindly introduced the blocks.io tip bot. EOS Cafe has made the very awesome blocks.io website and interface for wallets and voting and everything you can need basically, and Rex and staking. And they have also made a Telegram tip bot, which is so amazing and fun to use. They've added it to my Telegram channel. It's in a few other Telegram channels as well. It literally makes tipping the easiest thing ever. And so I just included a screenshot of what it looks like. You can see there's a couple of commands, /tip to tip somebody, /deposit to add funds to your account, withdraw, balance, and help. And you can see right here a little demonstration that this user down here has done /tip1SOV, and he tagged it with my name. So then it tipped me 1 SOV token. And currently this is working with EOS tokens, SOV, store of value tokens, Bitcoin, BTC, and BG tokens. So shout out to Syed and EOS Cafe for making such an awesome tip bot on Telegram. All right, guys, now we're going to dive deep. As I promised, we're going to dive into some meat and potatoes. This is EOS New York's proposal. We're going to start here. And I think I'm going to break this up into a couple of stages. So I'm going to give you a very high level, very user-friendly, easy explanation in my own understanding. Hopefully I have it right. It is a complicated procedure, but I think I've got it fairly simplified to help you understand what this is. Then I'm going to share Dan Larimer's proposal for governance. And lastly, I'm going to take a deep dive into the actual full article for EOS New York's proposal and really get to the nitty gritty. Okay. So first up, EOS New York's proposal. Here we go. They started with a tweet and they said, a possible future for EOS governance, uniting stakeholder incentives to maximize decentralization and chain performance, the voter inflection point, VIP, staking rewards, and global block producer performance standards. And when you click on this, you will see their article. It's quite a long read, 21 minutes. I did read the whole thing. I think, in fact, I read it twice just to make sure I had this. So you can see here's all the sections that we're going to cover on this. Not a quick read. And again, Syed from EOS Cafe was very kind and broke down a simple summary of the proposed changes. And so that's what we're going to go into first. So basically what EOS New York's proposal does from a very high level view is it replaces the 1% annual inflation with a flat fixed rate of 50 million tokens, which is approximately just under 5% per year starting out. But the reason that they're doing a fixed rate is so that as the number of tokens on EOS grows, the amount of inflation doesn't grow with it. So in this regard, actually the inflation stays fixed and becomes less and less each year, little by little, instead of more and more and compounding, which would be bad for inflation, right? Now, the pros and the cons is that we have a 5x of inflation occurring. And that was an immediate turnoff to me, but I did read further and there's a lot more to this proposal. And so I would say that is not the end of it. There's a lot more to this. The next change it puts in place is a very sought after change in the community, 1 token, 1 vote. You can still vote for up to 30 BPs, but then it's divided into those 30 instead of multiplied 30 times. Huge, awesome change. The third change is that REX no longer requires voting. You can put your tokens on the REX, you don't have to vote for a BP, and we'll get into why later. And another proposed change is to remove block pay and vote pay, which is the amount of reward you get for creating the blocks in the top 21, and the vote pay is just based strictly on number of votes. Those are going to be removed in this proposal, and it's going to move to a rank pay based system where it's a percentage, a fixed amount per rank. And for that reason, it actually solves the problem introduced by this graph, because then no longer are BPs trying to get the most tokens at the detriment of everyone else, because their reward is actually linear as it goes down and decreases. So that's what they're trying to do there. And another proposed feature is that missed blocks reduce total rewards for all voters, not just for the BPs who missed the blocks. And this is really important because it holds BPs accountable by the entire ecosystem. Every token holder now does not want a BP to miss a block. So they'll have a lot more pressure to have high performance or get voted out because all token holders now care, right? And the ones that voted him in are obviously going to be losing the profits. And I'm not going to go into this next point too much, but I do just want to give a shout out to Aaron Cox Jesta from Team Greymass. He's a big math whiz. He actually drew an entire Excel spreadsheet gaming out how this will work. And he came to the conclusion that the voter inflection point, which we'll get into later, should actually be decreased to prevent manipulation by BPs. So basically, in my own words, in the simplest way I can describe how this proposal works, is it's a complete game change, first of all. It removes the 1% block producer inflation that goes to the rewards for block producers per year, and it replaces it with either 1% or 5% inflation. But it replaces it in a fixed inflation, so it's actually 10 million or 50 million tokens. Now, the factor that determines whether it's 1% or 5% inflation is whether or not there's an inflection point, referred to as the voter inflection point of 30%. And these numbers are up for debate and change. But right now it's suggested to be 30%. So if the total EOS tokens on the entire ecosystem, more than 30% of those are voting, we then enact a 5% inflation, which might sound counterintuitive, but I will explain why in a second. But let's say that the total tokens are less than 30% on the EOS network that are voting, right? Only 25% of tokens are voting. We have almost the exact same situation as we have now. We have 10 million EOS per year, a fixed rate, which is better than a 1% inflation. And we also have the benefit of things like one token, one vote, which are put in place regardless. So it's definitely an improvement, even if the voter inflection point is not met. And I did a chart here, and I'm going to show you this to illustrate what I'm talking about. So as I described, if the voter inflection point is not met right here, then the system generates 10 million EOS. And 100% of that goes to the block producer pay. And 0 of that goes to the EOS token holders. So it's in the token holders' best interest to somehow seek to activate this 30% threshold right here. And what happens if they do activate the threshold is the system generates 50 million tokens instead of the 10 million over here. And when it activates the 50 million tokens, that is more inflation, but some of it goes back to the token holders in the form of system-built voting rewards. And when these 50 million tokens are generated, it's sort of like an if-then statement. If each individual token holder is voting, then they get only half of the reward. And at that point, 40% of the reward goes to the block producers and 10% is burned. And that equals a total of 50 million EOS. And you can see the breakdown here. But if the token holder is not voting, the token holders then get 100% of the reward. And initially, I found that this was extremely counterintuitive, and it is. It creates a sort of inflection point, the voter inflection point, in which various entities in the community need to work together to activate that 50 million EOS by achieving at least 30% of voting tokens. So if everyone wants to get 100% of the reward and says, I'm not voting, and no one votes, well, then no one gets a reward, because then we're back over to here where there's less than 30% of the global EOS voting. So someone's going to have to vote, right? And that can be the whales from the BPs, that can be token holders. And likely what'll happen is the community will coordinate, and that will include exchanges. It'll include block producers. It'll include token holders, because everyone gets rewarded more when this part of the system is enacted with 30% of votes. So it will encourage coordination and collaboration within the entire community. It's really quite an interesting and innovative new idea. All right. And I think that's where I'm going to leave it for the simplified version of this explanation. Now I'm going to show you Dan's proposal, a totally separate proposal. And after that, I'm going to come back to the EOS New York proposal, and we're going to dive deep into the full article, and I'm going to comment on it, and we can go back and forth with this illustration to make sure you really get it. All right, so next up, Dan's proposal. And he says, I just published a blockchain governance proposal. Tell me what you think. And this happened on the same day as EOS New York's. I think that EOS New York's was first, and Dan's came a few hours later. So it's great. We have some competing ideas, and we can maybe extract the best from both or pick the one that's really superior. And so Dan's is very, very different, very much simpler, but again, very different. And Dan explains here, he says, the purpose of blockchain governance is to make decisions in the best interest of as many people as possible while minimizing the opportunity for a small group of people to act in ways that benefit themselves at the expense of the community. The key is to align interests and select the parties with the most to lose if the network fails to operate to its potential. True proof of stake aligns long-term interests and puts control in the hands of those with a long-term commitment. From the perspective of what can be proven objectively, we can conservatively assume all accounts which vote for a producer are owned by the producer. We can also view votes and vote buying as nothing short of renting stake for the purpose of qualifying for the top N block producer positions. To ensure a long-term outlook and skin in the game, only tokens locked in a long-term staking contract qualify for voting. The yield someone earns for staking compensates them for the loss of liquidity and should be proportional to the length of time the tokens are locked up. It is best for the network for tokens to be locked as long as possible based upon market-determined rates of interest. And he gives it a comparative to the U.S. Treasury bond yield curve. And if you're not familiar with this, it shows kind of the confidence in the system, because logically, one would have a higher return the longer the period is. So if the return is higher on a short term, there's probably something wrong with the system. And this basically is the free market illustration of that confidence in the system, and also, in this case, the profit that one's going to make in the network. And Dan goes on to say, therefore, I propose the creation of 6 staking pools: 3-month, 6-month, 12-month, 2-year, 5-year, and 10-year. And those would essentially be these little dots on this graph, would be the representation of those different pools. In a network with a token supply of 1 billion tokens, each pool will receive 5 million tokens per year on a minute-by-minute basis, assuming network is operating at 100% reliability. So it's a liquid system. It's not like it's at the end of the week or the month or the year. Every minute it's being done and calculated. Users can buy into the pool to receive their pro rata share of that pool's income. So if you're in the 3-month pool, you get your share of that interest. If you're in the 6-month pool, you get your share of that interest. And logically, the longer time frame that you're staking, the less people are going to be willing to do that, so the higher return you will make. A user's vote weight is based upon the sum of their percentage of ownership of each pool. This represents a 3% annual inflation paid to the different staking pools. And that's because there are 6 pools. Each one gets 5 million tokens, which is 0.5% of inflation per year. So 0.5% times 6 pools is 3% inflation. Funds can be withdrawn from the pool at most once per week. Stake in a 3-month pool could be withdrawn at about 7% per week. Stake in a 10-year pool could be withdrawn at 0.2% per week. So you can see that your ability to withdraw from the pools decreases in amount the longer the duration that the staking period is for that pool. Again, it's a risk-reward thing, and exchanges aren't going to be willing to stake their tokens for 5 years or 2 years or 1 year, because they need to keep their tokens, at least enough of them, in a hot wallet that they can trade in and give them back to the users. Otherwise, they're operating at a fractional reserve exchange. And so this is very beneficial. This system is very beneficial for common everyday folk like you and me, stakeholders who want to make a profit, and it goes against those who are running exchanges. So it's a clever design. Tokens in a stake pool are taken out of the resource pool, so cannot be lent to the REX. This increases the bandwidth per token for all tokens in the REX. So there'll be less tokens in the REX, but each token will have more capacity, more throughput, more bandwidth, more net. And you'll note that if you're staking your tokens in these pools, you then cannot put your tokens on the REX. So you have to choose one or the other. Tokens can move from a shorter term to a longer term without any delay. So you can move 100% of your 3-month stake to a 10-year stake at any time. However, you cannot move from a 10-year to a shorter term except at the rate of 0.2% per week. So it's holding in those return amounts per pool type and saying that you can jump to a longer duration and immediately get more rewards. But if you want to go the other direction, you can only do it at the rate that that particular pool allows, which is smaller and smaller amounts the longer and longer term you get. So you have to think carefully before you stake your tokens for 2 years, for example, or 5 years. Producer rewards should be minimized to just 0.5% of token supply per year. So he's talking about reducing block producer pay to half of what it is currently, but then introducing 3% of additional pay here in these pools. Now, that's the reason why I'm not sure if BPs will approve this method. I feel like if Dan had introduced this proposal at the onset of EOS, at the start of the blockchain, it very well may have been successful. But instead, we didn't. And now we have BPs who are fortified in the top 21 and who don't want to lose half of their token supply to this new proposal. So I don't know that they will approve this proposal for that reason. I think you have to give the block producers, you have to give all participants in the ecosystem an incentivization to upgrade. And I think that that's what EOS New York's proposal does. And so while I like Dan's proposal, and I think it's very clever, I'm not sure if we can still get it approved by block producers realistically. And that's something that I think we'll have to debate and discuss and just come to determine if this is even a realistic plan of action to get it put in place. Again, if we put it in place at the start of the blockchain, probably would be running beautifully, but it's not. And it's a different playing field right now. So personally, I think it's awesome, but I'm leaning toward EOS New York's because I think that EOS New York's has a better chance of being put in place because it's actually incentivizing all parts of the EOS ecosystem to work together and to increase their rewards. Token holders, block producers, and exchanges. It doesn't leave anyone out. And so that's my current take on things with the first day of having read these two fairly complex proposals. I'm sure we'll hear a lot more discussion about these things. And to finish off on Dan's proposal, he says, all the decentralization in the world helps no one if the network cannot ensure that blocks are produced reliably. Therefore, all inflation is scaled by the 7-day average availability raised to the 10th power. So he's saying basically that, which is awesome, and similar to EOS New York's, that block producer reliability has a factor in rewards. And if block producers fail to make blocks, to the power of 10, there will be a reduction in pay, basically. So it's a checks and balances on the quality, technically, of block producers. And he gives some examples here. He says, at 99% reliability, the total inflation will be 90% of the max inflation of 3.5%. Again, 3% of that is the pools, 0.5 is the block producer pay. But we'll only get 90% of that if the block producers are missing 1% of the blocks. If a producer starts missing blocks and reliability falls to 97%, then everyone's yield falls to 73% of maximum yield. This means that voters, the stakers, are punished if they don't vote for reliable producers. Again, exactly in the same way that EOS New York's proposal holds BPs accountable through the entire ecosystem, so does Dan Larimer's proposal. So I really like this. It looks like either way we go, we're going to have very technically high quality BPs. And Dan says the expected outcome is that exchanges would be unable to vote with user tokens because most of the control is tied up in long-term staking contracts. With one token, one vote model and pay proportional to votes, it would end the situation of two producers being operated by one individual, which we do see today. You may not be aware of it, but we have block producers in paid top block producing spots that are owned by the same entity as other block producers. With only staked tokens voting, we assure that everyone seeking to be a producer has skin in the game, and that even the lowest producer slot is likely to be reliable. Perhaps one of the most fascinating outcomes is the discovery of a true market-based interest rate and yield curve. smaller stakeholders can gain extra influence and higher yields by participating in the long-term staking pools. So there's a lot of things I like about Dan's proposal. It introduces one token, one vote. It introduces a market-based interest rate and yield curve, which we've never had before. It encourages one block producer per entity. It discourages cartelization, and it punishes poor performance and keeps the community keeping the block producers in check for performance. So those are the pros I like about it. I think, again, the only con is I don't know if block producers are going to be incentivized enough to put this in place. It doesn't necessarily help them to gain 0.5% of interest instead of the 1% that they currently get. So will the top 21 put this in place? That's another question. But this is a fairly complex proposal. Maybe there's something I overlooked, and maybe the block producers can actually make more than they do now. And in that case, then it's fair game up there with EOS New York's proposal. Okay, and the last thing we're going to cover, as I promised, is a very thorough, in-depth look at EOS New York's proposal. So here it is. I actually pulled it up in a Word document so that I could make notes, because that's how deep we're going to get. And at the end of this video, I'm going to be giving a summary and answer some frequently asked questions as well. And I want to take this moment to just give a plug to my future proxy, my Colin Rewards proxy. Please vote for that, and I will vote for high quality BPs, as well as giving you a reward until proposals like the EOS New York or the Dan Larimer proposal are put in place, which will natively reward users at the blockchain level. Until then, let's get some rewards going with the Colin Rewards proxy and simultaneously vote for high quality BPs. And if you don't want to get rewards, I totally understand, and you can continue to vote for the Colin T Crypto non-rewards proxy, which still votes for high quality BPs. All right, before we start in this, I want to make some notes here. This is going to be a long portion of the video because there's a lot to cover. I'm going to do my best to concentrate on the important topics and condense it for rapidity of consumption. I will do a lot of reading because EOS New York has done an excellent job of writing this. I will also add my comments from time to time as they are applicable. And I'm going to start off with this part here. It's a definition of governance from EOS New York. The collective decisions we make, how we make them, and the mechanisms we use to enforce those decisions. In our opinion, the goal of EOS governance is to maintain a fluid balance between efficiency, which is throughput, scalability, speed, developer experience, user experience, etc., and security, decentralization, censorship resistance, cartel proof, etc., to provide a stable experience for users, developers, and code. The incentive structure that attempts to achieve this balance consists of at least two mechanisms: inflation and voting. So here we have defined the basis for this article. And now we shall begin. And this article is basically broken into two main sections: the problems that we face today on EOS governance, and the second part of the article covers the solution and what EOS New York is proposing. But this first part is so valuable. It really explains what is going on in total detail and accuracy, I feel. And it starts: there is very little that differentiates EOS from EOSIO, the software. So little separates the two that it would be safe to say that EOS is mostly operating on the default settings of EOSIO. This is especially true with regard to governance, where very little has changed since launch. Since EOS is a decentralized and independent community, these settings can be changed at any time so long as there is 15 of 21 approval from the block producers and underlying support from the token holders that support them. This proposal is a significant departure from the default settings of EOS governance. It is when the interest of the individual and the interests of the collective are aligned that EOS will draw closer to an equilibrium point. We don't know if this is the answer, but we've reached a point of maturity with the proposal where the most appropriate thing to do now is to release it to the community and allow it to take shape according to feedback. All numbers displayed are illustrative and should be modified following community discussions. So they're admitting that they may not have the perfect answer here, but they are ready to release it to the community for feedback. And from what I've seen, the community has very much embraced this with open arms and is totally digesting it, pulling it apart. Like I said, Graymass is gaming it out in Excel, putting all the formulas there, seeing how it works. And so a lot of the community is partaking in this. Summary of changes. Currently, the EOS incentive model is structured in such a way that it encourages behavior that is good for the individual, but not necessarily good for the blockchain as a whole. This is because, as a byproduct of seeking the greatest returns, individuals can erode one of EOS's core value propositions, decentralization. Block producer rewards are the most reliable and efficient way to obtain an EOS yield. Over the past year, best practices have emerged for most efficiently capturing this resource. A primary enabling factor is the one token 30 vote mechanism, which has led to the creation of a codependent mesh of block producers, I like that term, who coordinate votes with one another. While one token 30 votes remains an issue, there are other contributing factors as well. Vote trading, buying, selling, Sybil attacks on block producer rewards via BPs operating multiple paid nodes, mining pools, and the mega concentration of tokens on exchanges. Given enough time, these trends will continue. Remember that graph I showed you earlier with the top 21? Eventually, control of consensus will cement into the hands of a few powerful actors. In order to prevent businesses from being deterred from deploying on EOS because of the perceived centralization, the following changes and adjustments are proposed. And I want to note that any text you see in a green color here is my notes. This is not part of the article. So he says, about total inflation. It is proposed that inflation be adjusted and reallocated. Block pay and vote pay are reduced to 0%. Now, technically, they're not reduced to 0%, and this is my own notes here, because you'll see later that we've actually added 50 million tokens of EOS, not reduced it to 0%. It's just a different form of inflation, but it is actually more inflation. 100% of inflation is awarded to token holders through staking rewards via staking or lending to REX. This way, the CPU and net resources that your tokens afford you is never diluted. This yearly inflation rate is modified from a percentage to a fixed number in order to reduce the effects of inflation over a long period. And he's just explaining here how they've chosen a fixed rate of 50 million tokens of inflation or 10 million tokens of inflation instead of a percentage of 1% or 5%, because, as I described earlier, a percentage can compound over time and become larger and increasing, whereas a fixed rate actually becomes less in relation to the total growing supply of EOS tokens. So I do think that that's a smart idea. About voting. One token 30 votes is changed to one token, one divisible vote, where each additional block producer voted for further divides the total vote weight rather than multiplying it. Coordination of votes between large stakeholders is no longer possible. The ability to vote oneself into a BP spot with a large enough stake remains. So I think that's awesome. Again, similar to Dan's proposal, they both integrate a one token, one vote. I think it's become very understood and accepted that one token, one vote is the superior way to proceed, and one token, 30 votes was basically a mistake. About staking rewards. Voting diverts 50% of inflation you would otherwise receive. All right, I changed up my camera so that you can see the picture I've drawn here on the side, as well as the text, so you can follow along. About staking rewards. Voting diverts 50% of the inflation you would otherwise receive, where 10% is earmarked or burned, and 40% is sent to the block producer rewards pool. The 10% that is burned or earmarked upon voting creates a buffer that makes it always more profitable to self-stake than to self-vote. There now exists a general disincentive to vote. And so you'll see on the picture here on the bottom right section is the token holder voting? And if he is, then he gets only 50% of the reward. And then the block producer pay comes out of the remainder, and a little percentage is burned as well. And that's what he's talking about in this paragraph. I do want to make note of this earmarked part. I noticed that it was always listed as earmarked or burned. I'm not a fan of earmarking any funds and creating another EOSIO savings fund, whether it's for a workable proposal fund or whatever. I'm for burning them. And we create funds as we need them. We don't hold on to funds and hold on to earmarked inflation. It's just a silly way to proceed. We've done that for the first year of EOS's creation, and we don't need to reintroduce the same problem that we already have on EOS by earmarking funds. So I am fully in support of burning the tokens. I am not in support of earmarking any tokens. And I explain that all here. About the disincentive to vote. To counteract this disincentive and in order to maintain chain security, a voting inflection point called VIP level is proposed and set at 30% of issued EOS. If total tokens voting relative to total supply drops below the VIP, then staking rewards are toggled off. Inflation is reduced, and 100% of that inflation is awarded to block producers. And that is the example I have shown right here. So this example shows that if 30% of the global EOS tokens are not voted, the system then only generates 10 million EOS instead of 50, and the EOS token holders get none of it. And the block producers get the full 1%, or 10 million tokens annually. And so you can see now how there's an opposition going on here and opposing forces that forces the community to kind of meet this threshold. Because to get these awesome profits, there has to be at least 30% of the tokens voting. But if the guy votes, he gets less profits. And if there's not enough voters at all, no one gets any profits. So you can see quickly how the balance is struck in between. And I'm sure we'll reach close to 30% with a system like this, hovering just over 30% at all times so that we get this part of the equation activated. Since this number is a percentage of total supply, the inflection point rises upward so that the relative security of the chain increases over time, as does the diversity of tokens voting. I actually get this better than the first time I read this. So that's why we use a percentage here, 30%, and not a fixed rate of 300 million tokens, because the percentage will increase. Like when EOS started with 1 billion tokens, 30% would be about 300 million tokens. But when EOS reaches 1.1 billion tokens, well, then we'd have 330 million tokens. I'm doing that off the top of my head. I'm not sure if that's perfectly correct, but you can see how the threshold to activate the VIP, the voter inflection point, follows the growth of the total number of tokens on the chain. And so, which is smart, because then you have more and more voting tokens over time. And as he says, the security increases over time of the blockchain. If it was a fixed amount of the threshold, the security would actually decrease over time because the encouragement would be toward a smaller and smaller relative portion to the total token supply. About block producer pay. Block producers are now paid a percentage of EOS tokens in the reward pool based on rank, where each rank receives a fixed percentage of rewards in the pool with the highest percentage at rank 1. And so this is interesting. It's no longer paid on block pay and VPay, all this stuff. It's just a first place gets this percent, second place gets this percent, third place gets this percent for the BPs. And that actually encourages a more level, linear playing field of votes, as opposed to this ridiculous curve we see here where it's getting more and more skewed because vote pay gives you more rewards. So if you can push these guys down and push yourself up, especially with 30 votes per token, then you just make even more money. And so that will be cut out with a fixed sliding scale based on rank position as opposed to vote pay. About block producer performance. Block producers that miss greater than a specific percentage of the total rounds for which they are scheduled within a given pay period will not be eligible to claim pay for that period. Also, once this threshold is hit within a given period by any BP, the total inflation in the system, which is issued to all stakeholders and block producers, decreases rapidly during that period and refills slowly over time. This ensures that BP performance is a top shared priority for all EOS token holders. Again, very similar to Dan Larimer's proposal, the failure of a block producer to perform its job of creating blocks reliably has a negative effect on the rewards of all token holders in the ecosystem. And since token holders are the ones voting block producers into place, you can quickly see how this is a checks and balances system. Very, very smart. And this next section is called Death by 1,000 Cuts. Besides scalability, efficiency, throughput, etc., a massive part of the EOS value proposition is decentralization. Enough decentralization, or the belief that tokens are scarce, secure, etc., is partly what gives them value. Decentralization is why we're here. Despite this, the current incentive model is structured in such a way that eroding this value proposition is far more lucrative than maintaining it. As witnessed, this is my comment, as witnessed by the current top 21 block producer standings engaging in cartelization and vote trading amongst each other. With a year of hindsight and an intimate understanding of each of the comprising mechanics of the EOS incentive model, one can observe that EOS is currently hurtling toward a more centralized system governed by a codependent mesh of large stakeholders. Again, I witnessed this illustration. This is the result of many factors, most notably voter apathy and vote capture tactics, consensus's lack of Sybil resistance, an incentive and ability to coordinate votes, a general lack of options to obtain an APR on token stake, until the Colin Talks Crypto Rewards Proxy entered the scene and changed the game forever. If EOS's governance and the underlying incentive model is not adjusted, then it may eventually no longer offer decentralization as a significant value proposition and businesses may go elsewhere. It may be that those who build decentralized applications will fear these issues and choose to deploy their ideas, talent, capital, and time elsewhere. We may never hear about these businesses who defer. They may not publish their criticism. They will simply go elsewhere. Once this effect is felt, we fear it will be too late. And I just made a note here. I really feel like EOS New York gets the gravity of the situation and is truly looking at what the future results of action and inaction that we take today will be. All right, moving on to a new section called The Prisoner's Dilemma. EOS is currently experiencing a prisoner's dilemma paradox, where those in power focus on protecting themselves and are fearful of the other participants. By avoiding the risk of trying to stop what is happening, we end up producing a less optimal outcome than if we were to work together to identify the issues and propose a solution. We've spoken to large stakeholders who begrudgingly participate in the current system, but feel as if they would be hurt if they tried to step over the line and stop it. We do not believe there is an issue with large token holders voting for themselves and assuming a block producer spot. They put in bold letters. They paid for the tokens one way or another. So this is their right, and this proposal does not seek to strip token weight of its fundamental power and value. I do want to make the note that there is the exception of some exchanges that do not make their token holders aware that the exchange is using their tokens to vote with. And in that case, the exchange did not pay for those tokens, and in my opinion, is semi-unjustly using those tokens. Yeah, the token holders should be more savvy, but you can't expect that of the average user, so it's not realistic. Now, on the contrary, we have the open source exchange voting portal that we talked about earlier by GenerEOS and EOSIO, and Node 1, and that could change the game for exchanges and enable the token holders to vote. It is only when that large stakeholder is able to dictate additional votes for BPs other than themselves to other smaller stakeholders who have no choice but to comply as they rely on larger stakeholders' votes. This coordination is the issue, not who signs blocks as block producers. This is why we use the phrase codependent mesh, because that's what it is. So here he's basically summarizing that 30 votes per token is ruining the system, and BPs aren't inherently evil, so we're going to use the phrase codependent mesh, because essentially that's what it is. It is very important to note that, in our opinion, no parties that are wittingly or unwittingly contributing to these ideas are intent on damaging EOS. Quite the opposite. We believe most actors within the ecosystem have good intentions and long-term views for the EOS blockchain in mind. But like all of us, they are operating within the bounds of the incentive model built into the software, i.e. the EOS governance model. This proposal is not to place blame or paint villains, but to help the community identify the problems and to discuss a solution to them. And again, I think that EOS New York demonstrates a very solid understanding of the current state of affairs on EOS, and this is very well said. And it's what I've been saying. Block producers are playing on the playing field that the code allows them. And that's why I'm so insistent that Western BPs partake in the same rules, because otherwise they're only damaging themselves. And that's what my proxy seeks to do in the meantime, until we get something like this put in place. All right, on to a new section, the issues. The EOS voting mechanic is a Sybil attack waiting to happen. And I'll explain what a Sybil attack is. In a Sybil attack, the attacker subverts the reputation system of a peer-to-peer network by creating a large number of pseudonymous identities and uses them to gain a disproportionately large influence. And another way of saying it is basically one engaging in a Sybil attack is taking advantage of a system by creating more than one account with the purpose of manipulating some outcome, such as voting more times than one should, as in the case of BPs running multiple nodes in paid positions as they are doing today. EOS consensus is not Sybil resistant because a single actor may register multiple block producer accounts and multiply their voting weight at near zero cost. Through one's own stake, vote trading, and offering EOS mining to token holders, single actors are capable of controlling more than one spot in consensus. They can also control more than 1, 2, or even 3 or more accounts that are in standby positions. When businesses doubt whether or not consensus positions are independent of one another, then those businesses may find other places to go. This is not hypothetical. This is happening now. And I said here, great point. I don't think that the community is broadly aware of the fact that there are currently many paid sock puppet BP accounts operating presently in paid positions. This is happening today. If you take the top 30 accounts, I would be willing to wager that more than 3 or 4 of them are actually the same entity running multiple BP nodes. And this is where we have a failure in governance. And it's only going to get worse if we don't change anything. And it's very true that if businesses start suspecting that this is the case, they're not going to build on EOS if they think that 7 out of 21 BPs are the same BP. It's not very decentralized. It gives the 21 of the 21 BPs sort of a deceptive standing because it's not really 21 unique BPs in that case. Compounding the lack of Sybil resistance is the fact that separate parties can coordinate and mutually ensure spots in consensus through vote trading. When enough tokens have been obtained, one can leverage the multiplicative nature of token voting, i.e. 1 token equals 30 votes, to create a codependent mesh of the same number and mutually ensure consensus spots. When the turnover rate of consensus becomes 0, then the system relies on the benevolence of consensus instead of trustlessness. This is not hypothetical. This is happening now. Again, BPs are running more than one BP node. Lack of options to obtain a return. EOS does not exist in a bubble. It competes against every other dApp blockchain platform where the concept of staking rewards is a common and expected incentive. Yet, EOS remains the holdout. Because EOS has ignored market demand for passive returns, block rewards have effectively become the only game in town and have become a target as a result. Large token holders can access block rewards through a myriad of tactics and strategies, and provide very little beyond producing blocks and returns. This is not hypothetical. This is happening now. This is vote trading and this is mining pools is what they're talking about here. Mining pools are an accelerant toward centralization in DPoS systems. And here they go to explain a basic problem with BPs that run vote rewarding mining pools. In order to remain competitive, each mining pool will continue to raise the reward payouts until the absolute maximum has been reached. What do they do after that? They are free to create another block producer account, include it in their voting slate, and ask others to do the same, earn more, and raise the payout ceiling. Concurrently, they also reach out to other block producers who do not have the votes to trade and request fees, which buys them a spot in the proxy voting slate. Because the incentive model allows it and encourages it, the EOS blockchain will continue along this path until it is firmly in control of the hands of the few. its decentralization value proposition is lessened or lost, and the value of the token may be damaged as a result. This is not hypothetical, this is happening now, but we are just in the beginning stages. I'd argue we're in kind of the middle stages here. We can confirm that certain mining pools operate more than one block producer account with the sole purpose of generating more rewards to give back to voters. Centralized control is cementing. And I wanted to make note here, it's worth noting that the Colin Talks Crypto Rewards Proxy will never create additional BP nodes for additional income because I am not a block producer and I have no intention of becoming one. This means that while the rewards won't be able to compete with the top mining pool nodes, which do run multiple BP nodes, you will have the comfort of knowing you are voting for the highest value-adding BPs without supporting manipulation, which results in reduction of network security by having redundant BP nodes under the same entity's control. The Colin Talks Crypto's Reward Proxy will never support such behavior, as this is ultimately a destroyed network when the race to the bottom has reached the actual bottom, which is one BP controlling all top 21 nodes. And the article goes on to say, it would be wrong if we were to suggest that profit is the greatest and only motivation to obtain a block producer spot, because it's not. Prestige and power are two others. Prestige, being able to wear the badge of honor that is being a top 21 block producer, and perhaps being able to leverage its halo effect into driving more traffic for EOS-based business. And power, being able to have a seat on the board of the future of the decentralized internet. No matter what the motivation, those who possess the token weight to vote themselves into a top block producer spot will be able to continue to do so in this new proposal. All right, guys, so we've reached the halfway point of this article. As I said, it is a beast. And now we're going to look at what is the proposal. And we're going to look at this picture I've got here on this side as well. This is the nitty-gritty, what the proposal is going to do for EOS. And basically, it flips the model on its head, as it says here. By implementing the following proposal, we can expect that token holders become their own mining pools because they get rewarded directly from the system. And you'll see this on the green side over here on the picture. Also, we get that coordinating votes is made obsolete by the new voting algorithm, one token, one vote. Consensus is less susceptible to coordinated control. There's neither a reason to own more than one BP, nor does the voting mechanic enable it as much as it did. Also, it's worth noting that it's not just one token, one vote per one block producer. You can divide it into as many block producers, up to 30, I think, as you want, but then the weight gets divided by 30 as well. So you can vote for 30 BPs at 1/30th of the weight, or you can vote for one BP at the full voting weight. The other thing that this proposal does is block producer rewards are more evenly distributed across BPs. Block producer production performance is standardized and code enforced. So these are some of the great things about this proposal. And on to BP and token holder incentives. The only way to obtain a reliable return on EOS currently is to capture block producer and standby producer spots. We observe that the most effective way to do this is through vote trading, buying, and other means of coordination between a handful of actors. Basically, attacking one of EOS's core value propositions is the best way to earn a return. So we must separate the core value proposition, decentralized consensus, from the greatest possibility for returns. We propose to remove the 1% inflation awarded to block producers and replace it with new mechanics. And it's not entirely removing the 1% inflation. It's actually introducing a 1 to 5% inflation, roughly speaking. Technically, it's 10 million or 50 million token inflation. So it's actually more or less an increase. We propose to award all inflation to token holders who stake or lend their tokens to the REX. So you do have to lend your tokens to the REX to be eligible for the rewards on this new proposal. A vote for a block producer is now a diversion of 50% of the inflation that a token holder would otherwise receive into a pool that is distributed to block producers based on their rank. And you can see this on the image down here, where if the token holder is voting, then they get half the rewards. BP gets some pay and some tokens are burned. And if the token holder is not voting, then the token holder gets 100% of the reward. But to activate this threshold up here, which made this possible, there has to be someone voting. So So you can see it's a little bit of a chicken and egg circular proposition. Someone's going to need to activate this. Token holders are going to have to activate this so that some token holders can benefit. And maybe you'll get things like half one's tokens are voting and half one's tokens are not voting. At a high level, inflation is now a voluntary thing rather than something that is forced upon a user. The choice for any token to not be staked or lent to Rex and be used to cast a vote instead allows others to earn more. So if the guy didn't stake on the Rex or they didn't vote, this just means that others can then earn more tokens who are doing so. If one chooses only to stake, they would receive the maximum reward possible. And that's over here, this far right section, avoiding any dilution of resources or value, and in most cases, realizing a net gain of resources. And if you'll note, up until now, participating in the Rex required one to vote. And so obviously, in this case, that's not going to be the case. The Rex will be changed so that voting is optional when on the Rex. When a token holder votes and diverts inflation from themselves to the BP pool, right here, a portion of the tokens diverted are burned, right here. This means that in nearly all circumstances, voting would mean a lower return than if a token holder were to simply stake for themselves, which would reward them at the full rate. The proposed solution is to implement rank pay, where each rank receives a percentage of the total BP rewards rather than a flat amount. This removes the ability for any BP to extract a large number of rewards that detrimentally reduce the total paid producers. But this still creates vulnerability on the tail end of the rankings, where votes are likely much less concentrated than at the top, allowing large actors to assume paid spots there. But if we go back to the diversion model, the incentive to assume more of these spots is removed by the fact that staking will always yield more tokens than self-voting due to the portion burned. And I frankly have no idea what that's talking about. I think that's right here. It's a very complicated procedure, guys. Block producer performance enforcement. All right. And by the way, if you've watched the video this far, thank you very much and props. You are like a diehard EOS fan. I don't know what minute we're at right now, probably like 45 minutes into the video or something. All right, on to the next section, block producer performance enforcement. And basically this section covers holding VPs accountable for reliability as the producer of blocks. By removing pay based on blocks produced, also known as BPay, we remove any incentive to avoid missed blocks. Even so, the penalty applied for missed blocks was negligent, a few EOS. And in the case where votes are being coordinated with one another, votes are unlikely to change based on performance. So basically, the previous method of punishing block producers with BPay was ineffective. We've seen this in practice, where a large token holder or block producer was not producing blocks for 2 hours, while only one BP signed a proposal for their removal. In order to avoid poor performance due to lack of an incentive or lack of active BPs, we introduce a global block producer incentive model directly tied to performance. To encourage producers to maintain good uptime, the ability for any block producer to claim a reward needs to be removed whenever a threshold of missed full rounds is met. It's possible for any block producer to cause the next block producer to miss blocks or a full round, so we propose to decrease the total amount of inflation issued to all stakeholders during that same period as well. So it's a checks and balances of the entire community. No one's going to be happy if block producers miss blocks because everyone loses rewards for it. This penalty should be realized quickly and dissipate more slowly so that the effect is felt, and that more time must be spent producing full rounds than the time spent missing them. As a result, for all stakeholders to maximize their returns, they need to ensure the reliability of every block producer in the top 21. Again, I'm really amazed at the ingenuity and genius of this proposal by EOS New York. And now we're going to get into some examples. We're almost there, guys. And I actually drew this exact example right on the screen here. A token holder has 10,000 tokens right here, stakes them right here, and receives 500 EOS per year. That would be right here. If the token holder votes, they receive 50% of the reward right here, diverts 40% of the reward to the BP pool, and 10% is automatically burned right here. The token holder's annual yield is 250 EOS, 50 EOS is burned or earmarked, and 200 EOS goes to the BP pool. We end up with a model where the desire for returns is allowed to thrive until it consumes itself without disrupting blockchain operations. All right, guys, and that is basically it. And the approval and deployment plan is to do it in stages because it is such a massive undertaking. And major shout out to Cypherglass for donating $10,000 to the generation of this article, as well as the combined efforts from many other organizations and block producers. I would say that one of the major cons of this system, because it is so complex, is that it is an experiment. It's quite a large change in how governance works on EOS. But at the same time, one could also argue that EOS itself was an experiment from the onset and that its current governance system is broken. So the way I see it, it's only going to get worse to the point where EOS ultimately fails, meaning basically the chain's under one entity's control. That could be in several years from now, but that's where I see it heading if nothing changes. Or we can do something about it and put a proposal like this in place and at least have what I consider to be a very good chance at changing the course of EOS and ensuring its survival in the long run. And here's a shameless plug to vote for my proxy. And the frequently asked questions, I just added 2 of these here. So someone said, how soon could this feasibly get voted on and adopted? And you know, I think it could take quite a long while. You saw that there was 6 stages of implementation, and that would be after it gets coded, then tested, and game theoried. It would have to be tested so thoroughly, so ridiculously thoroughly. So I could see this taking a year or more to fully put in place. But I think we need to do it. So that's my answer for how long this could take. This is not going to get put in place tomorrow. This is not going to get put in place in a month or even in 2 months. I don't even see it getting put in place in 6 months due to the sheer elaborateness of this proposal. So I think more than a year for it to be complete. And lastly, kind of the question everyone wants to know is, do I recommend it? And I think you get the idea based on what I just said, but yes, I do. Now that I've more thoroughly looked at it, I do believe strongly that it should be done. EOS New York system is a superior system, either way it operates, with the voter threshold met or not met, here and here on the picture. Even when not met, the one token, one vote still gets put into place, and inflation is reduced slightly from 1% annually to the fixed 10 million tokens. So that's an improvement over what we have now. But if we do activate this VIP threshold, it's greatly improved in my opinion. Then token holders get rewarded and BPs get rewarded and some tokens get burned in the process. And we get rid of all these stupid mining cartels and mining pools and vote trading and multiple BPs and all that disgusting stuff that we have on EOS today. Thank you so much for watching this, guys. I can't believe you watched this whole video. Maybe you skipped ahead. Whatever it is, thank you for your continued support. Please vote for my proxies. I guarantee you I'm going to vote for value-adding BPs, and in my rewards proxy, value-adding BPs that reward you as well. And let's get this put in place. I will do what I can with your tokens to make sure that I vote changes like the EOS New York proposal in place, if that is what the community decides that it wants. Thanks, and have a great day.
Voice, we got a voice, you got a choice, I got a choice, we got a choice, you got a voice, I got a voice, we got a voice, you got a choice, I got a choice, we got a choice.